Today's video starts in Paris. The year is 1900, and a young Spaniard by the name of Pablo Picasso has just arrived in town. Picasso was a very talented and ambitious painter, and he moved to Paris, the cultural epicenter of Europe, in the hopes of establishing himself as an artist. Pablo was a bit of a child prodigy. From a very young age, he was making these incredible paintings and drawings. His dad was also a painter, and growing up, his dad could be a little bit pushy. He was always forcing him to practice his arts. And like many children with overly pushy parents, Pablo was also a very insecure man, but he would often come across as arrogant or narcissistic. Also, he had a kind of hatefulness within him. From a very young age, he fully embraced misogyny. Picasso's first few years in Paris were pretty bad. He lived in poverty, and a close friend of his died in 1901. During these early years, he painted a lot of blue paintings, paintings of beggars and sex workers. This is often referred to as Picasso's blue period. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of everything Picasso has made, but his blue period contains some unbelievably powerful paintings. But around 1904, Pablo's life was improving, and so was his mental health. So he started painting some cheerier, pink paintings, paintings of fun stuff like acrobats. This is referred to as Picasso's rose period. But it was in 1907 that Picasso would change the game of art by producing one of the most influential and problematic paintings of all time. It's called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Now, personally, I don't love it. Let's be honest, it's a bit of an eyesore. Also, it's like 8 foot tall, which is huge. It's a painting of 5 sex workers from a brothel in Barcelona, and it's been painted in an angular and fragmented style. And the faces of the 2 women on the far right have been painted in a style which is reminiscent of African sculpture. Now, even though I wouldn't want this painting in my living room, it is still a very influential painting and completely changed the rules of Western painting. There's a lot to unpack here, but first we need to understand the context around which this painting was made. Firstly, Europe was changing. Urbanization, industrialization, and technological advancements were rapidly changing the way people lived their lives and the way they thought about the world. Suddenly, people were flying across the English Channel. People were driving across France. The Eiffel Tower, this big, towering monument celebrating modernity and the triumph of engineering, was towering proudly over Paris, reminding Parisians of the modern age that they were living in. As the world rapidly modernized, artists were looking for new styles and new aesthetics which could reflect this modern world. And up until this point within European art, there was only one correct way to paint and draw, and this was using a technique called single point perspective, which was discovered during the Renaissance. It's basically the idea that things get smaller as they get further away, with a vanishing point on the horizon. Single point perspective depicted the world from the point of view of a single individual, who is static and stood on the ground, which up until recently was how the vast majority of humans perceived the world. But now, you could look out the window from a speeding car or aeroplane. You could look down on Paris from the top of the Eiffel Tower. And in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso debuts a new style of painting, which was angular and fragmented. And this fragmented and angular style of painting was significant because it broke free from single point perspective, which had dominated Western painting since the Renaissance, and it set Western painting on an entirely new course. Picasso didn't come up with this style all on his own. He was mainly inspired by 2 sources. Firstly, he was inspired by an earlier French painter by the name of Paul Cézanne. Cézanne was also trying to break away from single point perspective. He wanted to represent the world in a way that was more real than reality, and he did this by highlighting the underlying geometrical forms within nature. Picasso knew that Cézanne was onto something, and he wanted to build on what Cézanne had started. But more controversially, Picasso was also inspired by African sculpture, and specifically African masks. But to talk about this in sufficient depth, we need more context. Alongside the technological changes which were taking place, Europe's colonial empires were dominating the rest of the world, and France firmly believed in its own cultural superiority. Only 20 years earlier, the French Prime Minister Jules Ferry made a famous speech where he declared, "But it was not enough for France to be a good country. It had to be a great country that carried everywhere its language, its flag, its customs, and its genius." During this time, foreign artworks were being looted from the colonies and were flooding back into European cities, influencing artists, writers, and the collective imagination. Picasso had his own collection of African sculptures and masks, which had a huge impact on his work. So Picasso was looking to do three things. He wanted to continue Cézanne's legacy, he wanted to break free of the European tradition of single-point perspective, and he wanted to create a new style of painting that would reflect the experiences of modern life. And he found his breakthrough by taking inspiration from his collection of African masks and sculptures. These sculptures didn't obey the rules of Western art history. They used flat planes and strong contouring. They were bold, expressive, and they didn't attempt to imitate reality. And in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso's breakthrough painting, he appropriates the style and the visual language of these masks and sculptures. The word appropriate means to take something for one's own use, without the owner's consent. And I say Picasso appropriated these sculptures because he didn't know anything about them, or their purpose, or about the cultures they came from, nor did he ever attempt to learn about these cultures or about the artists who made the work that inspired him. He just used them because he thought they looked cool and exotic. The art critic Robert Hughes wrote, "The African carvings were an exploitable resource, like copper or palm oil, and Picasso's use of them was a kind of cultural plunder, a dainty parody of the imperial model." And what's worse is Picasso would later deny that African art ever inspired him. Picasso is often compared to Elvis Presley because both artists appropriated black art forms and remarketed them for predominantly white audiences, gaining immense fame and wealth in the process, and failing to credit the black artists who laid the foundation for their own success. We don't have an accurate record of which artworks Picasso had access to. Artworks from across Africa were being sent back to Europe as curiosities and examples of heathenish practices, meaning records weren't kept. We don't always know who owned which artwork, and like I said, Picasso didn't respect these cultures, and he never bothered to learn about these masks or the cultures they came from. He just used them for their aesthetic language. However, we know for certain that Picasso saw this mask because it was owned by the collector Maurice Vlaminck, and in 1905, Vlaminck recorded in his diary that he showed it to André Derain, Matisse, and Picasso. He wrote that they were speechless after seeing it and that all three were greatly affected by it. This mask comes from the Fang people of northern Gabon and southern Cameroon, and as you can see, there are similarities between Picasso's subjects and Fang sculpture. Masks from Fang culture are known as Ngil masks, and they were worn by a secret male society who were tasked with protecting the community, administering justice, and keeping the peace. That is, until they were outlawed by the French state in 1920. And in 2022, a Fang mask was sold at auction for 4.6 million euros, despite protests by the Gabonese people, who argued that the mask was illegally taken from France in the first place and should therefore be returned to the people of Gabon. Hey guys, if you made it this far into my video, then clearly you're getting some kind of value from my content. If you can afford it, please consider becoming a patron. This will help me to continue making art educational content for free that anyone on the internet can access, and I'd be hugely grateful. If you can't afford it, no worries. Please like, subscribe, comment, do all that sort of thing. I really appreciate anything you can do to help me to grow this channel. Anyway, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the video. Not many people saw Les Demoiselles d'Avignon when it was first painted in 1907. It was deemed too controversial and too immoral for the salons. But one person who did see the painting was Georges Braque. Braque was a young French painter from Normandy. Braque was also very inspired by Cézanne, and he understood that Picasso's latest painting had taken Cézanne's ideas a step further. Braque also had an interest in African sculpture, and he said that it opened up for him a new horizon. It permitted me to make contact with instinctive things which were in opposition to the false traditionalism that I abhorred. After witnessing Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Braque responded by making this painting, which, as you can see, uses some of the same angularness, simplified forms and neutral tones. From that point on, Picasso and Braque became inseparable. Braque described them as roped together like mountaineers. They were still both relatively unknown and worked together in isolation, both constantly responding back and forth to each other's paintings, and together they developed this new language which came to be known as Cubism. But what is Cubism? Cubism was an art movement that intended to depict the world not as we see it, but as it exists in reality. So we're looking into a matrix where we can see the same object from every angle at the same time. Cubism attempted to capture the essence of objects rather than their visual appearance from one angle. So although the images look strange and abstract, this was actually a radical form of realism. Phase 1 of Cubism was called Analytic Cubism. During this phase, Picasso and Braque's paintings became denser and more complex. They stopped using colour and embraced a muted palette. Also, they started painting on oval canvases. During this phase, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between Picasso and Braque's paintings. Eventually, Picasso and Braque reached a point where their paintings were almost totally abstract. But they never went fully abstract. There was always some reference to reality left in the paintings. This is because, to Picasso and Braque, Cubism was actually a radical form of realism, so it didn't make sense to completely let go of reality. Phase 2 of Cubism was called Synthetic Cubism, and this started around 1912. Picasso and Braque started experimenting with collage. They were sticking things onto the canvas to create new textures. They also started adding text to their paintings, they simplified their compositions, and they reintroduced colour. Then, in 1914, war broke out, and everyone was too busy killing each other in fields to worry about which phase of Cubism they were in. And at the end of the war, a completely new set of beliefs and ideas about art came to dominate Western culture. But all of them were in some way influenced by the Cubist breakthrough. And all of this started with the symbolic looting of African aesthetics by a white European artist, which parodied the wider dynamics of colonialism. Picasso used the visual language of African art, became rich and famous off the back of it, and never credited the artists or the cultures that led to his breakthrough painting. So when Picasso said, "Good artists copy, great artists steal," he was not joking. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. You're one of the real ones. Can you let me know that you got to the end of this video by dropping like a cat emoji in the comments? Because I reckon you're a minority. You guys are legends. Thank you so much for watching this video.